This is Infants on Thrones.
Minisode.
She's alive! Alive!
Hello, this is Scott, and welcome back to Infants on Thrones. Today's minisode is a little different. I'll be monologuing about a pet project of mine that I've been working on for many months. I'm speaking about this at Sunstone, but I wanted to get this up and give a more detailed explanation of what it is for any listeners who hadn't seen it on Facebook. It's called the Mormon Genome Project, and if you've been really paying attention on Infants on Thrones, you may have heard us drop a few hints about it. I'm pretty excited. First, let me explain the project, and then I'll tell you a pretty interesting backstory before I beg you for money. The idea for this came to me over a year ago, as I wondered if anyone had ever done any genetic testing on any of Joseph Smith's potential children from anyone who wasn't his first wife, Emma.
Yeah, someone should really do that.
That'd be a great idea.
So I did some research, and although some testing had been done, there wasn't really much reported, but we'll get back to that later. In short, I found that there was a really big piece missing. By far the most likely potential polygamous child of Joseph Smith lived to adulthood and had living descendants, and we can test those descendants against descendants of Joseph Smith and see if they're related. This person is Josephine Rosetta Lyon. She was born in Nauvoo a few months before Joseph Smith was killed. Her mother was Sylvia Sessions Lyon, and her grandmother was Patty Bartlett Sessions. Patty was pretty much the most badass pioneer grandma of all time. But today we're talking about Josephine. So, Josephine was born in Nauvoo in February 1844. Her mom names her Josephine after her father, Joseph, but it's a totally huge super secret that she is Joseph Smith's daughter. Josephine's mom, Sylvia, pretty much keeps it a secret, maybe even from her husband, until she's on her deathbed in 1882. Josephine is now 38 and apparently didn't know who her father was.
I am the father.
Josephine later makes an affidavit of what her mother told her. Even the LDS Church's chief apologist on polyandry and polygamy, Brian Hales, believes that Josephine is Joseph Smith's daughter. There's pretty much a historical consensus that Joseph Smith fathered this child. Now, this is a story that very few people know, probably because it is uncomfortable, but also probably because there's still that little cloud of doubt, that little sliver of possibility that Sylvia was wrong, or she meant something else, or Josephine wasn't actually the biological daughter. It's very unlikely given the historical information, but it's possible. But how cool would it be to use modern science to prove who her father was? It's the kind of thing that gets me excited. So instead of just hoping someone else does it, I'm actually doing it. I think it'll actually move the conversation forward. If confirmed, not only will it be indisputable that Joseph Smith had sex in his plural relationships, but it will also shed light on his polyandrous relationships as well. It would vindicate the story of an amazing pioneer family that's been hijacked by apologists and basically erased by the LDS Church in the recent essays. And it would probably open the door for other DNA studies, because there are other potential candidates as well. And I've spoken with some geneticists, and this is totally feasible to do. I need samples from 3 family groups. Pool A, Joseph Smith's known descendants through Emma. Pool B, Josephine's living descendants. And Pool C, descendants of Josephine's half-brother Charles, believed to be mothered by a different plural wife, but was fathered by Windsor Lyon, Sylvia's first husband. Now, Pool C we don't absolutely need, but if we had it, it would be great. And here's why. If Josephine's family is related to Joseph Smith and not to her half-brother Charles, that confirms Sylvia's story. If she's related to her half-brother Charles, but not to Joseph Smith, that would absolutely mean that Windsor, not Joseph Smith, was her father. Pretty cool, right? Now, remember when I said some testing had been done, but nothing had been reported about Josephine? Well, here's that interesting backstory I promised. Ah, yes. The year was 1999, when people were worried whether their mouse pads were Y2K ready. a group started doing DNA testing on potential Joseph Smith descendants. They were using a relatively simplistic form of testing and eliminated several obscure but potential non-Emma children. This research was funded by the Sorensen Molecular Genetic Foundation, started and owned by Jim Sorensen, eccentric LDS billionaire and biotech magnate. By 2005, the Deseret News reported that they had spent over $100,000 in testing just for Josephine, and they'd collected hundreds of samples. They continued testing, but by 2008, they said they would still not have results for about a year. The project kept dragging on. They published results that disconfirmed other potential children from Nauvoo who weren't very likely in the first place because there just wasn't enough historical evidence. Nothing on Josephine. In 2011, they found yet another disconfirmed child of Joseph Smith. The Deseret News published articles with titles like, DNA Solves Joseph Smith Mystery, that by this point didn't even mention Josephine. After that, the Sorensen Group was bought out by Ancestry.com, which is also founded by Mormons and based in Provo. The director of the Joseph Smith DNA Project, Dr. Ugo Perigo, a professional geneticist and not-so-professional apologist, was hired by the LDS Church to become their new CES director in Rome. That's right, the guy who was running this DNA project for the Sorensen Group got hired after that to go work for the LDS Church, in a pretty cushy position. Ancestry, being a private company, has refused to give the samples the light of day. They've scuttled the program, and they won't answer any questions about it. I personally emailed Dr. Perigo in 2014, and his responses as to why there were never any results for Josephine after so many years were not substantive. He basically avoided the question. So, as you can probably tell, it all sounds pretty fishy to me. Keep in mind, this all started back when Ricky Martin was popular. It sounds like they had the results for Josephine. How could they not, after so many years and so much money spent and so many samples collected? And it sounds like they didn't want to publish them, but they wanted to publish all the other obscure, disconfirming evidence that they could, and eventually it all just got scuttled and sucked into the memory hole. Now, I've had it confirmed that in the years since it was shut down, 15 of Josephine's oldest descendants have died, and that there are a few of the oldest generation left. We can still do the testing now, but in a generation or two, it's going to be much more difficult, if not impossible. That's where you all come in. Remember that testing I talked about? Well, it isn't cheap. It costs about $100 per test, and we need a bunch of them. We also want to have the results professionally analyzed by a geneticist, not me. And we already have about $2,000 in donations, but we need a lot more. My funding goal is $15,000. We might not necessarily need quite that much, but $2,000 definitely isn't going to cut it. So I'm asking everybody to step up. I'm calling on you, our listeners, for help. If this is something you'd like to see happen, please donate. There's a link to our GoFundMe campaign on the website, MormonGenomeProject.com. If we don't get the financial support we need, this just won't work. So think about all those free podcasts you feel guilty about enjoying so much. Think about all that tithing you're probably not paying. I know, I'm laying it on thick, but seriously, please donate. And for those who already have, thank you so much for your support. We're off to a great start already. In a couple of weeks, I should have the recording from my Sunstone presentation on the same topic up on the website, and there will be a lot more detail within that presentation. In the meantime, please check out MormonGenomeProject.com. And thank you for your support. Anyone for the closing prayer?
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.